Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a little dose of reality. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Aging and Strong. We were having a little technical difficulty earlier, so that's why you see me like this. We had to use our phones, both Andy Baker and I. As promised, we have Andy Baker on with us, guest from Kenwood Strength and Conditioning. He's been in the biz for 20 years. He's an expert in the strength and conditioning field. He works with elite athletes. He works with moms and pops and grandmas and and granddads, and also youngsters as well, young kids as well. Andy, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm hanging in there. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties, but you've been in the military. You know how Murphy's Law works.
Yeah, and we both live in Houston, and we know how internet connections
Ex-
are with Houston Storm. So,
exactly. Right on. Right on. Well, Andy, I got you on here, man. I've started a little podcast here, Aging and Strong, and I'm primarily focusing on the 50 to 55 plus community. I think it's needed in the USA for sure. And I noticed it as I got older. I have grandkids now, so prior to that, I thought about that, and I said, I'm going to have some grandkids here soon enough, and I'm going to get older quickly. And as when you hit your 50s, it goes by really quick. So I said, I got to do something. I mean, I've been kind of fit most of my life, one way or the other, being in the military and playing sports throughout my life and all that kind of stuff. But I said, I got to do something to get stronger, and I got to find the most efficient way to do that, especially being in at my age in the 50s and plus. When I started, I was 59 when I started the starting strength program, which I found out to be, in my opinion, one of the best. And you represent that the starting strength um, programs. And what I'd like to ask you, Andy, the first question is when did you get started in the strength and conditioning arena?
I mean, I've been involved with lifting weights and athletics and that sort of thing my entire life. Professionally, I got started in 2007 when I opened up my gym, here in Kingwood, just north of Houston. And when I got started, as a young man in my early 20s, my predominant focus at the time was I wanted to train athletes. I wanted to
Hmm.
train high school, college athletes, that sort of thing. And I did quite a bit of that. And I didn't have any, you know, I didn't have any plans to get into training the older crowd, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s crowd. But one thing about one of the realities about training the youth crowd, the student athletes, the high school kids, the college kids, is they don't get out of school till 3 or 4 o'clock. So your day as a trainer doesn't really start till, for most of the year anyways, doesn't really start till, 3, 4 o'clock when school gets out. And so what that means is that you've got a gym that's basic. And my gym is a private training studio. It's not just like a membership gym. So I only work with my
Right.
training clients. So that means that you've got a gym that's basically empty in the mornings and the afternoons. And so I had to obviously do something about that. So I kind of opened it up to not just athletes, but anybody in the community that wanted to come in and learn how to lift weights and get fit, get strong, that sort of thing. And I had people of all ages come in. I had my high school and my college athletes at night and in the afternoon, and then I had people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all ages kind of coming in, in the mornings and the afternoons and that sort of thing. And I found that the people that my methodology really resonated with, where it really made the biggest impact on their life. Everybody wants to look better at the beach and have some muscle and be able to lift a certain amount of weight or whatever. But in terms of like having a real significant impact on people's quality of life, was that older crowd. And so they're the ones that stayed. They're the ones that referred their friends. They're the ones that went out and told everybody, in the community, hey, this is really helping me. And I feel so much better and I can do so much more and I hurt less and all these different things. And so it just kept building and growing. And, before, within a few years, it was like, man, I started out wanting to train all these high school athletes and college athletes, and I still have those. But like, I looked up one day and my gym was just nothing but people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it
Mhm.
wasn't my intention. It's just that that's the people that, got the most out of the strength training approach, that really saw the most value to it, and
Mhm.
also really wanted. They're the really ones that really valued the professional instruction of having a coach or a trainer, because it was something that they wanted to do. But people that are older that want to start lifting weights, one thing that they always talk about is, they're a little bit afraid of it. They're worried about safety. They want to do it. They want to do it, but they want to make sure they're doing things right and that they're being safe about it. They're not going to get injured and all that sort of thing. So what I was doing at my gym, it just clicked with that crowd. And so, that was back in 2007, 2008 when I started, and I've been doing it now, for almost 20 years now here at the gym. And then, I've expanded to an online coaching business as well, and I've got tons of people, same demographic, 50s, 60s, and we've kind of morphed our training methodology a little bit to really suit that crowd and find, the right exercises and the right sets and reps and progression schemes and all that sort of thing that's suitable for an older crowd. Because while it's very similar to training younger people, it is different. Older people
Mhm.
don't recover quite as well. They're more, the teaching of the exercises can be a little bit different. People that are 50s, 60s, that sort of thing, when they come in, they have a lot of lived life that a 20-year-old doesn't have. And that means they've had knee replacement surgeries, or they've had a history of back pain, or they've had, any number of different things that may require us to adjust the way that we train them in order to where they can get stronger and progress, but do it safely and do it in a way that works with their body. And so we've been able to do that. And I've got a lot of, as a trainer, I've got a lot of enjoyment out of it, just because, everybody wants to, make money to pay the bills and everything. But ideally, you want to also be doing something, with your career and with your life, where you feel like you're making a positive impact on other people. And so I've been able to do that, where, I feel like, some of my clients that now have been with me for, nearly 20 years, where, you've had a really positive impact on their quality of life. And so that's and made the aging process a lot less painful for them, and made their later years in life a lot more productive and a lot more independent. And that's a big thing. Somebody that starts training in their 50s and 60s and stays with it is going to have that decade of the 70s and 80s is going to look totally different than for somebody who neglected their body for the previous several decades. And so when they get to their 70s, it's like, man, they're functionally like they're still in their 40s and 50s, in terms of
Right.
strength,
Right.
mobility, and that sort of thing. They still have all the same problems that everybody else does when you get old. It's not a cure for aging. I mean, I'm only in my 40s, and there's a difference between being in your 40s and being in your 20s, for sure. But it makes a big difference in the quality of people's lives. And so that's why I've kept doing what I do.
Yeah, and that's great. And you said something very important, and that's for and I can relate because I'm an older guy. I've said it before. Folks that watched me and know me know that I'm 65, and I can vouch for what you said. It's very important, independence. Being able to independently drive your car, walk to walk around the block, go to the grocery store, bring groceries in the house. Practical things like that. Sitting down on the toilet, right? Trying to get up off the toilet, trying to get off the couch, whatever. Those are important things to folks, 65, 70, 75, 80 years old. And a lot of folks take that for granted, and they're not thinking about that when they're 40s and maybe even in their 50s. And that's
Yeah,
that's that's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I'm
and
trying to do here at Aging and Strong, is to plant that seed and encourage folks 50 plus and beyond, and even younger, to start thinking about, how are you going to feel? What are you going to be able to do in the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah.
and the things of that nature. So Andy, talking about the program, the strength training program, what type of program would you put someone 50 plus in? What is the rep what is the rep in the set scheme and that kind of thing? Now, providing that they don't have any type of lingering injuries or anything like that. Just your average Joe guy that's okay, doesn't have he's never fallen off a motorcycle, never rode in a horse, never had any
Yeah.
kind of bad injuries in his life.
Well, it it kind you kind of have to meet people where they're at to a degree. So some people have experience with this stuff. Some people have been lifelong gym rats, and they have a little bit. They kind of know what they're doing, and you can kind of refine what they're doing. Most of my clients that come to me here locally in my gym are new. They've never
Mhm.
lifted weights before. They may have been to a gym. Most people that go to gyms, we talk about like big commercial type facilities, just membership based gyms. Most older people, if they go, will stick to the cardio stuff. Historic,
Right.
so and I'm not an anti cardio guy at all.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but what happens is as you get older, and this I've seen this a lot with clients is people say that we're lifelong runners. That's what they've always done for exercise is run. Is there's a shelf life to that. And what happens is when people get, and it varies person by person. And there's a marathon guy here in Kingwood that's in his 80s that still runs marathons, but that's not most people. And so what you find is that people that engage in like a lot of running and that sort of thing is when they get into their 50s and especially in their 60s is that things kind of start to fall apart. And the cardiovascular type stuff is not, while it's not bad, is that it's not
Hmm.
addressing what's happening. And what
Hmm.
is happening as we age is most people are familiar with what osteoporosis is, or osteopenia, which is the loss of bone mass associated with aging. That's pretty well known to most people. Most people are not aware of a term called sarcopenia, which is the same thing, but it happens to our muscles. So the sarcomere it's kind of the exercise science nerd term for a muscle fiber. And what happens with us as we age is we start to experience what's called sarcopenia, which is for a variety of reasons, hormonal and otherwise, is that our muscles start to lose mass. And when muscles start to lose mass, you start to lose your muscle mass, is the smaller muscles' ability to produce force or to express strength declines. So we start to lose functional capacity. So our muscles get smaller, we start to get weaker, and things start to hurt more as we get weaker. And a lot of times, what happens with that is that it becomes a vicious cycle. As we get weaker and we lose more functional capacity, people start to actually do less, and then that just perpetuates the cycle. They start doing less things for themselves. And in a society like ours, where you can pay for people to do things for you, do your yard work and do a lot of your chores and that sort of thing, people start to engage in less and less and less physical activity, and that just accelerates that decline or that loss of muscle mass, that sarcopenia. So you have to do something to interrupt that, and cardio does not interrupt that. Okay, so
Hmm.
riding the stationary, and in fact, in some ways, it accelerates it. I mean, if you look at the body of a marathon runner, that's not the body that you want as you age. You don't want to be doing things that are accelerating the rate of muscle loss, and things that burn a lot of calories, like long distance running or long distance cycling. While those are very good for you cardiovascularly, they can accelerate that loss of muscle mass as we age. And so it's very important then to find something. Okay, what do we do to stop that process? What do we do to stop that vicious cycle? And that's where weightlifting comes in, and that's, or strength training, whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it, but
Right.
some form of resistance. So that's what I do predominantly, is that my program is a strength based program. So then the question becomes, well, what type of strength training should I do? Should I be doing machines or dumbbells? And you can get on the internet and find 1,000 different answers. I'm a barbell guy. Okay. So for people that don't know, that, the barbell is the long one, the dumbbell is the short one that you hold in your hand. So they all work. I'm a barbell guy. So I prescribe exercises like squats and deadlifts and bench presses and those traditional barbell based strength training exercises. And I use those for, not just for my older clients. I use them for my athletes because I think that they are the best. They are the best and most efficient way to load normal human movement. Okay. And so one of the things that I always like to do though, too, is that because those exercises are used in sports like powerlifting, which is the guys that get up there and lift the big heavy weights for an all out one repetition maximum. Or things like bodybuilding, which is, the guys up on stage in their Speedos, flexing their muscles and all oiled up. A lot of people have when you talk about weightlifting or building muscle, or that, they have a misconception associated with that people that engage in weightlifting, that's what they're doing. And I always try to tell my clients, just because I'm a power lifter and because I use some of those movements that powerlifters use, it's not a powerlifting program. It's not a bodybuilding program. It's a functional strength program. It uses a lot of those movements, but it's fundamentally different in a lot of ways from powerlifting. And so I think it's important for people to understand that, because a lot of people can get turned off by it just because there's still a lot of misconceptions that when you talk about weightlifting, you're talking about just, Arnold or, the guys on TV that are flipping. And that's not what we're doing. Those types of movements are accessible and beneficial to everybody. So I'm a barbell guy. One of the things that my clients benefit from is that they have a coach to teach them how to do it. And that's one of the drawbacks of barbell training for somebody doing it on their own, is that there is a learning curve to it. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So what I recommend that people do is, before they ever go into the gym and try to put a bar on their back and start doing squats or deadlifts, is to first read the book Starting Strength by Mark Ripito. Okay. That is the Starting Strength is the best book on the market for learning the first of all, why you should strength train. That if you're not bought in already, but more importantly, how to do it, how to do the exercises, why the exercises are coached in the manner that they're coached. And it teaches you, how to do those exercises yourself. Read the book, and then, online, you get on startingstrength.com or whatever, you get on their YouTube channel, there's a million videos to watch. So it involves a little bit of, there's a little bit of kind of, work that you need to do before you get to the gym, just some intellectual work. And a lot of people won't do that. And I don't know what to tell them, other than anything worth doing is going to involve a little bit of research. So it's not that easy to just walk into a gym and start trying to do squats and deadlifts. So do your homework first and learn it. And it's worth the investment of time. It's worth the $29.95 to buy the book, which I make no money from, but buy the book. Read the book, watch the videos. All this stuff is basically free information to you. You're giving yourself an education on how to prolong your quality of life. It's worth a couple of weeks of reading and watching some videos, and then go in to find a good barbell based facility and go in and try to do these movements, and or hire a coach that is experienced with the barbell movements. You can hire a Starting Strength coach. I'm one of them. There's several all over the country. But if you don't have access to one of those, do your research before you, just like you would any other professional. You wouldn't just go hire the first lawyer that you meet or the first, financial advisor or anything else. Find a trainer that is used to working with older clients and that is experienced in coaching the barbell movements, and invest in some coaching. Yes, personal training. Coaching is expensive. I would not suggest going to a Planet Fitness or one of these kind of big box gyms. You're not going to get the best quality of trainer. Find a small gym, a local gym, like a good family-owned gym that provides some personal training. Those are where typically your better coaches are going to be found at. And find somebody that can teach you to do what you want to do and get some professional help with it. If you have issues, you have a lot of knee issues, back issues, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do the barbell movements. But I would definitely recommend that you get some coaching first. If not, if you don't want to mess with the more complex, barbell based type of strength training movements, you know, I'm a barbell guy, but I'm not anti machine, and that's why machines were invented. They're easier to use. They're not quite as effective as free weights in terms of building muscle and building strength and coordination and balance and mobility and all those things that you get from a barbell that you don't quite get with the machine based training. But the machine based training is infinitely better than nothing, and they're easy to gyms that have lots of machines are really easy to find. You really want to focus on building up your leg strength. You want to work your whole body, but really exercises that work your legs, your hips, your back, those sorts of things, because that's where that just like working with an athlete. I mean, that's where their power center is at.
Mm-hmm.
And where regular people are not different from athletes. The only different is in the degree, right? I mean, to get around in regular everyday life and build functional capacity and build strength and build balance and that sort of thing, it's all basically from the waist down, right? It's your core, it's your hips, it's your legs, your glutes. Those are your power muscles, and just like those are generally the most beneficial to the athlete, they're also the most beneficial muscles to be training for a 70-year-old woman who lives alone that would like to be able to bend down at the grocery store and pick up a case of water off of the floor and put it in her grocery cart without having to ask for help.
Yeah.
So the needs of an older person and the needs of an athlete are not that different. It's just the degree. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be able to sprint 80 yards down the football field and avoid a 250-pound linebacker, right? But
Right.
you do, but the same muscles that guy uses are the same muscles that you use to mow your
Right.
yard or to pick up a case of water off the floor or to get yourself off of the floor if you fall, to have stability and balance on a step ladder or whatever else that you're doing that requires leg, hip, and back strength. Those are the muscles that you really need to be focused on. I would prefer that people are doing things like squats and deadlifts with a barbell, but in the absence of that, anything where you are working those muscles against a resistance, whether it's a leg press machine or a dumbbell squat or whatever, is still going to be infinitely better than nothing.
Right. Right. And it's funny you mentioned the older lady in the grocery store and had to pick up a case of water. I had to do that the other day. As a matter of fact, I was in the grocery store and a young lady was with her grandson. I'm assuming it was her grandson, and she was trying to load up a case of water in her buggy, and I had to go over there and I asked her. I said, "You need some help?" She says, "Oh, please, sir, I can't get this." I had to lift it up and put it in the buggy. So I definitely can relate to that. Also, Andy, before we get into maybe some of the nitty gritty, like the sets and the reps and stuff like that, what you would recommend, and maybe some of the modifications, like for someone that has some lingering injuries or, from the past or whatnot. I did want to bring this book up here. This is the Barbell Prescription, if you all can see it. It's the Barbell Prescription, Strength Training for Life After 40. And Dr. Jonathan M. Sullivan and Andy Baker. Uh, Now, I'm not sure, were you the co-author or the author, Andy,
I'm,
on
I-
this
we're,
book?
I'm the We co-authored that book. So basically, Dr. Sullivan, who is all he is a multiple PhD and MD, and I got together on that book. And basically, what it is we took Starting Strength, which was the book that I just plugged a while ago,
Right.
and we kind of adapted. We added some things to it. So Dr. Sullivan basically did the first half of the book, which
Mm-hmm.
was a very in-depth, and he does an excellent job of taking a
Yes.
very complex subject and breaking it down in a way that a regular person without a medical degree can understand what he's
Right.
talking about. But how strength training and more muscle mass helps your body in a variety of ways of what we were talking about, of avoiding sarcopenia, but also the role that more muscle mass has in countering metabolic disease, its function in helping to improve insulin sensitivity so you can avoid things like diabetes, and its effects on regulation of blood pressure and all of the benefits of having more muscle mass, more bone mass, and being stronger. He breaks it down in a way that you could lay that book down. And this was what he said. He wanted to write a book that he could take to the head of the exercise physiology department at, wherever, University of Texas, or another, high end university, and lay that book down in front of a PhD, in front of the head of an exercise physiology department, and every argument would stand scientifically, but that also we could give to our grandmother, and she could also read it and understand it without it being, a bunch of insider, jargon that goes way over your head because you don't have a PhD and all this sort of stuff. So I think we accomplished that. So it's a great, and he makes it kind of entertaining as well, to read through it. He did the first half of the book, and then I came in and did the second half of the book, which is his was more of kind of the why you should do it and how all this stuff works. Mine was more of the practical of, okay, how do you implement this? And we kind of, it's not as in-depth as starting. That's why I recommended starting strength first, because starting strength goes a little bit more in depth on the mechanics of how to do the movements, but we do touch on that as well in the Barbell Prescription. Not as in depth as starting strength was, but we do touch on that. So it is a standalone book. I still recommend people read starting strength, but in the Barbell Prescription, with the second half of the book, we get into, okay, what exercises should you do? How should you do them? How should you set up a weekly program? How many days a week should you train? What should your sets and reps be? How should you progress from one workout to the next and 1 week to the next, so you're not just going into the gym and doing the same weights over and over again? And it's all tailored to an over 40 demographic. Now, when we wrote the book, we debated on, well, should it be over 40 or over 50 or over 60? We kind of went back and forth, because a 40-year-old is not the same as an 80-year-old, and we didn't want to, but we didn't want to turn on, we wanted to bring as many people in. So we kind of just settled on 40, because that's 40 is the age where you really probably start needing to make some modifications to your training based on age. The difference between training at 40 and training at 30 is not vastly different. But I'm 43, and I've been lifting since I was 14 years old. So I've been at this for, nearly 30 years. And I can tell you there is a difference between being 43 versus 33 versus 23. And the workload that I used to do when I was in my 20s is not the same that I do now. I have to do a little bit less. Now I can still go in there and bang some heavy weights and stuff, but I don't do as much as I used to do in terms of the sets and reps. So my overall volume of exercise is a little bit lower because recovery is not as good. So we went with 40 because that was kind of the age we felt like, okay, people may start needing to make some age adjusted modifications, even if they're very small. And then we kind of go up through 40s, 50s, 60s. What happens to you, physiologically as you get older. And so we have, kind of, here's recommended things to do maybe in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that sort of thing. So it's hard to put because especially as people age, we say no two people are the same, right? In a way, we're all the same. We're all humans. We're all made of the same tissue. We all have the same metabolic processes and all that sort of thing. But people are different. But if you take a group of 25-year-olds, if I just went and got 100 random 25-year-old men off the street, they are going to be much more homogenous or similar than if I go get 100 65-year-olds off the street. There's going to be so much more individual differences in their ability and their capacity, because again, they've had that extra 40 years of life and they've all aged differently. You've accumulated this many injuries. This guy hasn't. This guy is on this many medications and has these different diseases or whatever, and this guy is healthy, of course. So you don't see that as much with a younger crowd. So it's hard to say, okay, you should do this in your 50s, you should do this in your 60s, because the variation between individuals starts to matter more as you age. But at the same time, um, with every decade of life, things do change. So we kind of give some general recommendations on how one
Yeah.
should adjust their training in terms of adjusting training frequency and sets and reps and that sort of thing.
Okay, so let's say I was to go into your gym or maybe online training or whatever, and I'm a new guy, and I'm okay. I'm pretty healthy. I don't take a lot of medications. I don't have any kind of chronic diseases. You know, have a good autoimmune is
System.
pretty good. Yeah. And hadn't had a lot of bad injuries. Maybe a knee operation or something, but it's fine now. Maybe some back pain. The general
Right.
pains, everyday pains that a guy my age might experience. How would based just on that information, what would you do to start someone off on a program such as Starting Strength, or one that you would
First,
recommend?
first, first exercise I do with everybody on day one is a squat. That's the first exercise that I teach, and that's regardless. That's if you're a 17-year-old kid trying to make the high school football team, or
Hmm.
if you're his 75-year-old granddad. Day one,
Okay.
or if you're a 30-year-old mom who wants to look good in a swimsuit this summer or whatever. I'm going to teach you how to squat day one, because whether no matter your goals are, that exercise is there's no equivalent movement to that in terms of um, the amount of muscle that it trains as thoroughly as it does. And I mean, from the waist down, in terms of the size of the muscles that it trains, the amount of muscle that it trains, as thoroughly as it trains them, nothing can compare to a squat. And so I want to make sure that we can do that movement, and 99% of people can. So that's another thing. When you start mentioning the word or the exercise, you start talking about squats with older people. A lot of misconceptions about that in terms of, oh well, I can't do squats. I have bad knees. The reason you have bad knees is because you can't do squats. But there are ways around it. There's very, very few people who cannot do squats. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be strong at them. Okay. And
Right.
most people aren't. Most people are extraordinarily weak at them, which is why that's a good place to start. Because if you start off very, very weak on a squat, especially if you're older, and you get strong on a squat, it is going to have life changing experiences. Even if we did no other exercises in the program ever, you just came in for a year and we did nothing but squats twice a week, it is going to have a very significant impact on your quality of life now and down the road, because that muscle that you're building in the lower body and the hips and the back and the legs, that we call that your physiological 401k. You're making a deposit into an account that you are going to draw from later. In other words, the more muscle you can build now in your 50s and 60s, the more you can
Hmm.
draw off of that muscle and strength in your 70s and 80s, maybe in your 90s, when life starts to maybe go south on you, right? You're eventually going to have to draw on the amount of muscle. That's why it's better to start younger, right? Just like with saving for retirement, better to start in your 20s than it is in your 50s. But if you haven't started, start now, because it's not too late. And the more strength and the more muscle you can build, the more you can draw off that later. And there is no, it's like, to stick with the kind of the financial analogy, which I like because people tend to understand it. It is like the highest interest earning account you can put your money into, right? So if you're going to save for retirement, and this mutual fund earns 5% a year, and this one earns 12% year over year, which one are you going to put your money into? Right? It's a no-brainer. Squats
Right.
are like that high interest earning account. That's the one where you have the most potential to make the most significant deposits in, that you can draw on later in life. So that's where I'm going to start everybody. um, and I will determine at that point, this is where it gets highly individual, is, how far down can we get on day one? How much weight can you do on day one, if any? Usually with my older clients, I don't add any weight to them on day one. We're just doing a body weight squat, because squats, if you overdo them, um, it's they will leave you limping for a few days, and I don't like to do that with people. I like it for, you're going to be sore. There's almost no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
on day if you've never done them before. But I try to minimize that with my clients, so I don't generally add any load to them on day one. It's just something that we do with body weight very often. If it's a younger guy, high school kid, athlete, or whatever, I have no sympathy for them. So I don't. If you're younger than me, I don't have any sympathy for you. So I'll go ahead and load
Right.
you up on day one. I don't care how
Right.
sore you are if you're 17, but if you're 70, I don't want your legs to be rusty the next.
Right.
So and I want people to get confident with the exercise, and I want them to learn that, hey, I can come in today. I just came in and did 5 sets of squats, and my knees didn't explode, my back didn't explode, and I can do this. And then they're really bought in to because a lot of people, the older clients, they lack confidence, right? And they lack confidence. Am I even going to be able to do this, or is my body just going to fall apart on me trying to strength train, or am I going to get hurt? And so if you can get them a workout that they can complete and do it without falling apart and without being too sore and that sort of thing, then you've really created a lot of buy-in to the program, and you've really built up a lot of confidence and positive mental and emotional momentum that they can carry
Mm-hmm.
forward with them, because their first obstacle is not, necessarily even how weak they are or whatever. Their main obstacles in here. It's that the fear and kind of these limitations, this artificial box they've built around them about what they can or can't do. And when you show them that, yeah, you in fact can do squats, and in a couple of weeks, I'm going to hand you a 5 or 10 pound dumbbell, and now you're going to be doing squats with weight. And in 6 weeks or 6 months or whenever we get there, I'm going to put a 45-pound bar across your back, and you're going to squat with a 45-pound bar across your back. And then we're going to put weight on that 45-pound bar, and you're going to squat that. And that whole time, not only are they building the muscle and strength, but they are building so much confidence in themselves and their abilities, and all these limitations that they've put on themselves of, oh, I'm old, I'm weak, I'm injured, I'm this, I'm that. All those limitations that they put on themselves start to disappear, and and it changes them fundamentally. And I've seen that a lot with my clients, is that it changes them, not just in the weight room, not just in the gym, but in life itself. They become more confident to do more things, and to be, I don't want to say less cautious. That sounds like recklessness, but less
Mm-hmm.
afraid, less fearful, less dependent, and just, more confident in their functional ability to do more for themselves, and without the constant fear of, I'm going to get hurt, or I'm going to fall, or I'm going to be, if I do this, I'm going to be too tired, that sort of thing. So it has a lot of positive mental and emotional benefits, as well as the physical. So I start them with the squat there, and then, where people start, there's no way to say you should start with X amount of weight on day one. And then
Mm-hmm.
it varies so much by the individual. Um, I very often start people out with what's called a box squat. Okay. A box squat is just in a lot of gyms. What you'll see is we have these little metal, they're really stools. They're not boxes. We call them
Mm-hmm.
boxes for whatever reason, but they're like little stools, and they come in basically like 24, anywhere from 24 to 12 inches. They come at different heights, right?
Right.
And I just have them sit down onto a box and stand back up. Well, that's just sitting down into a chair. I mean, do you sit down to dinner?
Exactly.
You sit down at your kitchen table, you sit down in a chair and you stand up. That's a squat. Okay. That's all a
Mm-hmm.
squat is. In the gym, we don't, when we refer to a squat, we typically mean without a box or without a chair or whatever. If we use that box, that surface for them to sit down onto, we call it a box squat. So I
Mm-hmm.
very often start them with box squats, because it's very easy to learn that way, with what's called a tactile cue, that having that surface to just sit down on. Um, it has some physical benefits as well. That I won't get into here, because it's kind of, I don't want to get
Sure.
into too much of the
Sure.
nitty gritty of biomechanics and stuff, but the ability to
Right.
sit back on your heels more and sit back further, that kind of thing. It puts a lot less stress on the knees, that sort of thing. So I may start people out on day one with sitting down to a 20-inch box with no weight. And we may
Mm-hmm.
do that for a few workouts. And then on week 2, I progress them down to an 18-inch box. Still no weight. Our progression is just going down lower and lower and lower to progressively lower heights. And so over time, we may, let's say every week or every 2 weeks, we go down another 2 inches. So we go down from a 20-inch box to an 18-inch box to a 16 to a 14 to a 12. until I get them where they can squat all the way down to a 12-inch box and stand back up for, say, 3 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 8 or whatever. And then at that point, when they can squat down to that 12-inch box and stand up on their own, 3 sets of 5 or 8 reps or whatever, then I'll start introducing a little bit of weight. So now I'll hand them a small dumbbell to hold, a 10-pound dumbbell, and they'll do the same motion, but just holding a little bit of weight. And then the weights get heavier and heavier until eventually people outgrow a dumbbell. You get up to a 50-pound dumbbell, it gets harder to hold the weight than it does to squat it. So at that point, we'll possibly switch them over to putting a barbell across their back, and I'll teach them how to do a barbell box squat. So we can still use the box, but I'll be teaching them with a heavier and heavier weight. And one of the benefits of the barbell is that, and this is very important for everybody, but it's very important for older people, is one of the benefits of a barbell, and this is something you don't necessarily get with machines or dumbbells even, is you can load that barbell in very, very small increments at each workout. Okay, so you can go up. People are capable, when they first start out for the first several months, they're capable of doing a little bit more weight basically at every workout, or at least every week. And so, but you can't go up, you're not going to be able to go up, say, 10 pounds at a time. So, on day one, if you start up with 20 pounds on day one, you're not going to go to 30 pounds on day two, and then 40 pounds, and then 50. So barbells allow you to add, because they make very small plates. You can add I have plates as small as a half a pound in my gym. You put a half-pound weight on each side, and you're going up 1 pound per workout. So you can progress somebody 20 pounds this week, 21 pounds next week, 22 pounds the week after. And that, it seems like, well, that's nothing. Like, you're just going up a pound a week. Yeah, well, but in 10 weeks, you've gone up 10 pounds. In 20 weeks, which is less than 6 months, you've gone up 20 pounds. And you do so in a way that is so slow. It's kind of like the frog in the pot of boiling water. You don't even notice that the weight is getting heavier, workout to workout. But over time, it gets a lot heavier. And so you can do that, and that allows people to recover from the workload, in a very sustainable way. So it's very important. And most gyms, this is why it's good to go sometimes to a kind of a specialty strength gym, because we tend to have that equipment. You're not going to find that at a Planet Fitness or a Gold's Gym. They're not going to have those are called fractional plates. They're not going to have those. They're going to have nothing but, they may have a pair of 2.5s, which allow you to go up 5 pounds a workout. But especially for somebody that's smaller and older, so let's say a 110 or 115 pound female that's in her 70s, there is absolutely no way that she's going up 5 or 10 pounds per workout on any of her movements, even her squats, but especially on upper body movements, because women tend to be much weaker than men upper body wise, and older, lighter, all that sorts of thing. You have to go up in small increments. You have to be able to make those. That's not just a recommendation. That is a necessary part of programming for older people, especially smaller older people. If you're not, bigger people tend to be able to go up by bigger amounts. But even for them, there's, I'm always telling my clients, I'm not in any rush. I do want you to progress, but I'm not in any rush to try to load weight on you too much. I do want to go up as often as we can, but if we go up a pound this week and a pound next week and a pound the week after that, that's fine. You're still going in the right direction.
You're progressively overloading. And that's the thing is a lot of folks have this you talked about fear and stuff, especially squatting, for instance, and the weight on the bar, right? They're like, wait a minute, I'm going to squat down 100 pounds and ass to the grass. Well, basically in a starting sprints program, it's not ass to the grass. And like you said, it's like the frog in the boiling water, right? Once you reach a weight, let's say you started with 45 and you're up to 100 now. Well, that 100's not going to feel it's going to feel a little heavier, but not much more than 45. Am I correct to say that?
Yeah. And in some ways it might even be easier.
There you go.
So yeah, so your first time that you get a barbell on your back, it may feel, well, you've never had a barbell on your back, so the experience is totally new to you, for one. But, a good coach is not going to put that barbell. I'm never going to give my client a weight and hope that they can get it. Okay. I've done this enough to where if I hand them a weight and tell them to squat it 5 times, I know that they can probably squat it 8 or 10 times. Right. So I want my
Yeah.
clients to be successful, and I don't, until much, and, unless I'm working with a competitive lifter or somebody like that, I'm not pushing people up to a point where I'm giving them a weight and then crossing my fingers behind my back and saying, "Oh, I hope they get it." Like I know that they can get it. So by the time they work up to that 100-pound squat, maybe they did 6 weeks of just body weight squats, and then they started with a 10-pound dumbbell, and then they went to a 15 and a 20, and so on and so forth, until they got to a 45-pound bar. And then once they did the 45-pound bar, they did 45 and 50 and 55 and 60 and 65 and 70. And so they have weeks and months of training
Mm-hmm.
and of strength adaptation under their belt by the time they get to 100. So in almost no circumstances is somebody going to come into the gym and we put 100 pounds on their back and hope that they can do it. Because I mean, I can tell you that 90% of them can't. And I wouldn't,
Right.
especially on day one, you're going to be working people far below their capacity. It's an introductory session. And the thing is, with strength training, all it is an adaptation to a stress. And this is something that the book goes into very deeply. And it's very important to understand for whether you're programming for yourself, or certainly if you're a coach programming for other people. You have to understand that model of that stress recovery adaptation cycle. When you first start out, if you've never done squats before, and I have you do 3 sets of 10 with no weight off a box, even if that's easy on day one, if you've never done it, that represents a stress that is going to drive an adaptation. So we impose the stress during the training session. We take some days off from the gym. That allows the recovery. So we have the stress, the recovery, and then you have the adaptation to that stress. Okay. So as long as what you are doing is more than you've done before, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily matter how hard it is. Okay. And so in the beginning stages, a lot of people will have weeks and months of progress where the squatting is really not all that hard. Right. And that's a big mistake people make, is if you come into the gym and you do 50, and the goal of the workout today is to squat 50 pounds for 3 sets of 5 reps, and you go, "Hey, Andy, that was easy, man. That didn't even feel like work." I go, "Okay, good. Next time we're going to go up to 55 pounds." And you go, "Well, we don't. Why go only to 55? I feel like I could easily do 60 or 65 or 70,
Mm-hmm.
because you have never done 55. You have only done 50. So 55 will
Yeah.
represent a stress that is going to cause you to adapt without unnecessarily adding too much fatigue or overload to your system. So a
Right.
lot of people make that mistake, as they have a conception in their head that every workout should be maximally hard, or you're not getting anything out of it. The no pain,
Mm.
no gain, or
Right.
pain is just weakness leaving the body. All this kind of stuff. And that's not really true. All you need to do with a workout is a little bit more than you did last time. Whether it's hard or easy is almost, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but in the beginning stages, it is almost irrelevant. So if it's easy, if you can go up 5 pounds, and that's easy, if 55 is easy, and then you go up to 60, and that's easy too, don't make a jump up to 80. Don't make a 20. Just go up the next little
Right.
5 pound increment, or in the
Right.
context of a smaller, maybe a smaller older female, just go up that next 1 or 2 pounds. You don't need to
And
go. You'll hit a wall faster. You'll burn out faster if you try to
Mhm.
get to your maximum too quickly. Just keep adding those little doses of stress. It's kind of like a suntan, right? A suntan is just an adaptation to a stress, right? A tan is it's an adaptation to the stress of the UV rays or whatever from the sun. If you
Mhm.
came to me and you said, "I want to go get a suntan," okay, and you're white as a ghost, you haven't been out in the sun in a year, right?
Yeah.
I don't send you out in Houston, Texas in July
No.
from noon to 3 with your shirt off, right? Because that's going to give you blisters and third-degree burns. You don't need
Yep.
to do that. You go outside with your shirt off for 10 minutes or 5 minutes,
Yep.
and you just get a little bit pink, and that's it, right? And then the next day you go out and do it again, just a little bit longer. What that, like, it's the same, but a lot of people and this is more of a problem with younger people than older people, to be honest, but a lot of people rush. They're like, well, I want the tan now, so I'm just going to go out and lay in the sun for 3 hours, even though I haven't been out in a year. Well, you
Hmm.
get burned. You get burned. And that's the same thing that can happen in weight training. And so, a lot of the injuries that you'll see this is another big misconception. A lot of the injuries that you'll see in the gym or the weight room are not actually form issues. And a lot of people think that why I got injured because I have bad form. A lot of it is inappropriate progression. It's progressing
Hmm.
too fast. It's adding more weight or more reps or more days of the week or whatever, more than you can handle. And those tissues get fatigued, they get tired, and they give way. So you want to load your body with the smallest dose of stress possible at each training session.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. I messed up my back a little bit, tweaked it a little bit by probably trying to. I was doing a deadlift, and I thought like you said, I thought it was the form. But basically, what I did was is I took 10 pounds off the bar, and in my next session, I did it again, and it was fine. And my back was still a little tweaked, but just by taking that little bit of stress off my back with taking off those 10 pounds, I was able to do the deadlift, and I haven't really had any back issues since then.
Yeah,
But
and
that
that's
was my own fault. Yeah,
yeah, and it's I mean if you train yourself, mistakes can be made for sure.
sure, sure.
And that's people's biggest fear. Most older people, especially, their biggest fear about going to the gym and lifting weights, especially free weights, is that they're going to get hurt.
Yes,
It's not like the risk is zero. Okay, I mean, you can get hurt in the gym, but
sure.
I can what all I can tell people is that most of the injuries that occur in the gym are very minor. Okay. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never had a major injury in my gym. Okay. Small muscle tweaks here and there, but actually
Right.
pretty rarely for what I have my clients do and the average age of my clients and all
Mm-hmm.
of the various things that they have wrong with them. You would think
Mm-hmm.
that I'd have a lot more people injured, but I always tell people this, I'm sitting down with a new client. They're very worried they're going to get hurt. And I said, look, you're paying me to coach you, right? This is how I make my living. It's how I feed my family, pay my mortgage, save for my. I have a vested interest in not hurting you, okay? Because if you want to put
Yep.
your own gym out of business, or if you want to have your personal training business, go under, the quickest way to do that is to injure your clients because injured clients will quit, right? And so I wouldn't use a training methodology where I was injuring people all the time. Okay, it's just I have a financial incentive to not injure people. Okay, so I
Right.
want to get people the best results possible, but I also want to avoid injury. So for 20 years, you don't want to operate in a very a high with a high risk training modality. So I personally don't. Now I'm a decently competent coach, so and I understand programming and technique and all that sort of thing. Um, but most injuries that people will experience in the gym, if you're trying to do the best technique possible, doesn't have to even be perfect, but you're trying to do
Right.
the best technique possible and you're progressing in a very conservative manner, 99% of the injuries that you will occur are going to be basic small things of just buildup of inflammation and that sort of thing that can be treated with ibuprofen. Very few, big, very rarely are you going to find big, other than competitors and things like that where you have major injuries that require any kind of surgical intervention. That stuff is extremely rare, and it's far, and the data supports this. Go to any orthopedic clinic and look who's in there getting their knees replaced and their hips. It's people that don't engage in strength training, right? So it's like anything else. Is there a risk to doing it? Yeah, it's minimal, but there's a risk. I'm not going to bullshit people and say that there's absolutely no risk to strength training.
Right.
There is as you age, this is a very important point. As you age, there is a far greater risk to not strength training. Okay. If you look at the data of how people of falls and how people die and how people become infirm and how they wind up in wheelchairs and walkers and nursing homes, it is by being weak and frail. Okay. And that is and having metabolic disease and everything else. And so there is a far greater risk to not exercising and not strength training than there is to doing it. Okay. And I mean, it's like I always go back to the financial stuff because people understand it. Is there a risk to putting your money in the market? Yeah. There's a far greater risk to not investing. because
Yeah,
it almost guarantees you're going to wind up at retirement age with no money. So,
exactly. Yeah,
whether it's real estate or the stock market or
yeah,
whatever else you want to invest your money into, by definition, that's a risk, right?
yeah. That's true.
There's the possibility of loss. But the data clearly shows by not investing your money somewhere in something that earns some sort of return on that investment, there is a far greater risk that you're going to wind up broke and poor when you're 70 than if you don't. Okay. So,
Yeah,
that's,
exactly.
I use the same analogy with whether it's, I mean, any exercise, but the risk of not doing it is far greater than doing it. So that's why I tell people, I preface this whole conversation with take the time to learn it and do it right. And don't just rush into it and, watch a YouTube video and then go run in the gym and try to teach yourself how to squat. Like spend the time and gather the necessary knowledge to go in and do it and minimize your risk of doing things wrong and, setting yourself back, right off the bat with some sort of injury.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I've told people on my podcast here, I said, if you're 70, 80 years old and you haven't done any kind of strength training or anything to get stronger, you're like one fall from being in the hospital for
Yeah.
maybe months, or maybe never even able to walk again. You know?
If you read the data on falls, it's not necessarily, I mean, sometimes the fall kills you, right? I mean, you fall, you hit your
Right,
head and
right.
you're dead.
Yeah,
That's it.
sure, sure,
It's
sure.
not the fall usually that kills people. It's the ensuing weeks and months down the road of surgeries that are required, and you never quite recover from that. Of once you get yourself in that system of okay, I fell, now I've got to get my hip replaced. So I had clotting, and or this, I had to get on these medications, and now even if you survive it and you don't die, um, a lot, there's so much of a decline in quality of life related to falls, and the data on that is it's hard to argue with, of how much, as you age, how much you need to avoid falling. And I actually had this conversation with a client this morning that I was training, and she was telling me how much better her balance was. And for older people, they talk about, well, I don't have good balance, right? I have poor balance. Lack of balance comes from a lack of strength. Okay. There's not some thing that happens that makes you all of a sudden have bad balance. It's not an inner ear thing that throws off your equilibrium. It is, for the most part, and it's, even if there are other factors, there's almost nothing you can do about them. The
Mm-hmm.
strength part of it, when you start to lose your legs and you start to lose your leg strength, your hip strength, your core strength, and your balance starts to go, that is a strength problem. And it is a problem that is reversible. And so it's just like a toddler, right? Why do toddlers have bad balance? Well, they're weak.
Yeah,
Okay, the same, it just goes in reverse as you age. So as that toddler ages and goes from a 2-year-old to a 3-year-old to a 4-year-old, they get stronger, and they get what? They get better balance, and they can do
yeah,
more. Now, instead of walking and toddling, they can walk fast, they can run, and they can climb, they can jump, they can do all these things because they got stronger. Just, I mean, not through training, just through the natural process of getting older. That same thing happens in reverse as you age. As you get weaker, now, okay, now you can't run anymore. Okay, now your walking has slowed. Okay, now you're kind of, if you have to stand on an uneven surface, or you have to walk up a, like a flower bed or something like that, that's and that's not a smooth paved sidewalk, you feel like your balance is bad. You see people all the time, they go to step off a curb or something at a shop. My gym is in a shopping center, and there's a curb outside, and I see these older people that walk by all the time, and before they step off the curb, they have to stop for a second, and they have to really think about it before they step off that curb. Or maybe they have to put their hand on the hood of a nearby car, or before they step off that curb, because it's a challenge to their balance. And
yeah,
you see people, that my clients that walk out of my gym, when they walk to their car, they don't do that. They just step right off the curb and keep going, because they don't have the same balance issues as somebody who is untrained and weak. And I just had this conversation with my client this morning, and she said, she was talking about, she works in her garden all the time. She said, I just can't believe how much better balance I have just walking up and down the flower beds and carrying, bags of mulch and
right,
heavy stuff, where I don't
right.
feel like I'm constantly in danger of being wobbly and going to fall. And, I said, strength training is the number one thing you can do to prevent falls. I said, you can't necessarily 100% a fall. I mean, you could trip. You know,
Sure.
the strongest
Sure.
guy in the world could trip over something and fall. So, but I said if you do fall, you're less likely to experience a bad fall, right? If you watch an somebody that's very old and very frail and very weak, if you've ever seen them fall, it's like chopping a tree down. It's just timber. They have no ability to catch themselves. They have no ability to adjust their body in space and absorb the impact. They just fall and they're completely loose. Their head can hit the ground because they have no neck strength. They have no core strength. And so when they fall, when they hit the ground, it's a much more impactful event than when somebody who is stronger and in better physical shape is. So if you do fall, you're less likely to be catastrophically injured if you're stronger. If for some reason you are catastrophically injured, your recovery from that is going to be much, much easier. So it's win-win all the
Yep.
way around to invest in that,
100%.
you know. And we talk about, I keep going back to falls, but if you look at, again, you go to the data and you read about all cause mortality for people. Falls are pretty high up on the list for older people of the event that triggered that death. Even if they wind up dying from something else, they died from a blood clot in the hospital. Well, it's because they were in surgery for a fall, or it's
Yeah.
because they were having to have their hip replaced, and or whatever. And so, to the degree that you can prevent that or mitigate the damage from it, it's well worth the investment.
Yeah, I agree, and I can relate to that fall as well. I was a few years back. I was I got a ride from somebody at work, and he has one of these big Humvees, and they're really
Yeah.
high off the ground. You know what I'm talking about. And so when I was kind of in a hurry, I was working at the time, and I was driving a truck at the time, and we had the trucks parked out in the back, and it was all rocks back there. Anyway, so I was in the back of his car, and I had my backpack, on my back and everything. And I stepped out of the car and I forgot I was in a Humvee, and I missed the step and I fell right on my butt. I mean, I fell down pretty hard, man. And he looked at me, man, are you all right? Are you okay? And I said, no, I'm good, man. I mean, I kind of shook it off a little bit. I was sore, but I can't
Right.
imagine and I was lifting weights at the time too. I was doing the starting strength and everything. And I said, man, if I can't even imagine what it would have been like if I hadn't have been lifting and my bones were stronger, my muscles and gotten stronger and everything. So yeah, I was sore for a couple days, but after that I was good. But so I can relate to that, and that's the seed I want to try to plant, put out there for folks that are watching is just with that alone. And you mentioned falls, just for older folks, think about that. You could be one fall away from being in a hospitalized or having surgery, hip replacement, or whatever. Just that alone would want me to go into start lifting weights, whether it's in a club, a gym, whatever.
Yeah.
You got to do something and get stronger. It's very critical, very important. Having strength is what is it helps with the longevity, right? At least a better quality of life. You
the,
know.
the the data is becoming more and more clear on that. And it's funny because I've been doing this long enough now where when I first started doing this 20 years ago, and I know trainers that are older than me that have been doing it longer than I have, I've had this
Hmm.
conversation with them, is that 20 years ago when I started this, one of the biggest impediments to getting an older person to start strength training was their doctor, because their doctor would say, they go having a regular physical checkup or whatever. What are you doing? And they say, well, I started with this trainer and he's got me lifting weights. And the doctor would go, oh, be careful with that. Don't hurt your back. Don't hurt your knees. You got to be careful when you're older. Just do light and easy and that sort
Hmm.
of thing. That has changed in the last 20 years. More and more people, when they go to their doctor for their checkup or their physical or whatever, they say, yeah, I started with this trainer, he's got me doing squats and deadlifts and everything. And it's like that, the doctors now are like, good, great, like keep doing it.
Hmm.
And
That's good to hear.
I feel like the medical community has recognized, I think it's been two things. I think one, there's been a lot more published research on the benefits of strength training for older people, and it's becoming incontrovertible now that it is just from a research point of view that the benefits are it's incontrovertible for older people, that the improvements in muscle mass and bone mass and metabolic health and all those sorts of things are just
Right.
the benefits far outweigh any potential risk. So I think, excuse me,
Hmm.
so I think doctors have been seeing that, and so that the way that they're being educated, and doctors are not educated in this stuff. That's the other. Doctors don't tip unless they do it themselves. They themselves don't know jack about lifting weights. A lot of people assume that they
Yeah.
do because, especially older clients like that boomer generation, they ascribe almost a godlike status to their doctor. So whatever their doctor says is like it was carried down on the tablets from Mount Sinai. E- Even if the doctor has no training or information whatsoever in that area. And one thing about, apologies to any doctors watching this, but a lot of doctors don't like to use the words "I don't know," and so they have a tendency to speak with a lot of authority on subject matter that they themselves do not understand or have any experience with. Um, and that's a problem if a doctor tells a client, "Oh, be careful, don't just make sure you don't do any of those squats or deadlifts or whatever." It's very hard for a trainer to break through to somebody whose doctor has told them not to do it. Um, but doctors have, now that the way that they're being educated and such, they're being told that the weight training and all that kind of stuff, the resistance training has this very, very positive impact. There's a lot of doctors on social media now that have had a very positive impact.
Yeah.
I see it all the time now in kind of popular literature. New York Times and things like that run articles now all the time on. I've given interviews to Forbes and publications like that older generation has a lot of trust in, where they are seeing these kind of popular outlets now writing articles and stuff about research that's been done that talks about the benefits of strength training for older people. But I also think there's a second one. I think doctors, because there's more older people now than ever engaging in strength training, I think they have seen it from the bottom up. They've seen it from their
Yeah.
own patients, that there is a wild difference between a patient that's in their 60s, 70s, or 80s that engages in regular, vigorous, hard exercise, and particularly strength training, and those that don't. Because the difference in somebody who's, say, even like 80, somebody that is 80 years old that has been lifting weights for the last 10 or 15 years versus an 80-year-old, barring any sort of other disease, cancer or whatever that you can't
Hmm.
necessarily prevent, but just functional movement and that sort of thing. The difference between somebody who's 80 that has engaged in regular strength training for the past decade and somebody who has not, you cannot look at those two examples side by side and not see a marked difference. And I think doctors have probably seen a lot from the ground up, of the benefits of it. And so it's so that it's a good thing for us because now we have a lot more support from the medical community than we did 10 or 15 years ago. Um, and that's been
Yeah.
really, really, really helpful, because if a client is told by their doctor, yeah, you should be doing that weightlifting, and in particular you should be doing those squats and deadlifts, that's really, really helpful for us to have that buy-in, from them when
Hmm.
they've kind of gotten that green. Even though I don't need a doctor to tell me that I can, that it's good for my client to do the squats and deadlifts, it helps that client to buy in more to what I'm
Sure.
teaching them, if their doctor, versus if their doctor has told them not to do it, because they're always going to be a little hesitant. And the first time they feel the smallest, the smallest twinge in their knee that barely registers on their radar, they go, "Oh, there, oh, yeah, so I'm out." That my doctor
Yeah.
told me not to do that. And they're out. But so it's very important that we have that, and I think that is changing, and it's been a real positive.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Well, Andy, I'm going to cut it a little short here. You've been just a wealth of information. I don't want to overwhelm everybody that's listening because some of these folks are new to the industry here, new to the strength training, and but I really appreciate you for coming on. I hope I can get you on again sometime because there's just so much information out that you can provide that would definitely help in this arena of strength training. So I appreciate you for coming on. And again, you can find his book, The Barbell Prescription, Strength Training for Life After 40. I believe it's on Amazon. Is that correct, Andy?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And I think the last time I checked, it was like 26 bucks or something like that.
It's
For 26 bucks is a wealth of information here. Great stuff. It's a really good investment to get this book. And Andy, where can they find you online and your website and all that stuff?
If you're local to the Kingwood, Houston area, which I don't know how many people are, but if you're local to the Kingwood, Houston area, you can go to bakerpersonaltraining.com. More than likely, if you're not local to the Kingwood, Houston area, you go to just my name, andybaker.com. That's the hub for all of my, all the stuff I sell, or if you just want to get in, contact with me, there's a contact form. You can say I heard you on Steve's show. If you want to ask me, if you have some questions, I try to be as responsive as possible to people, help you answer your questions, or even find you a good coach. I'm part of a pretty big network of other good coaches that do what I do, that also do the barbell training, do the strength training, that work with a lot of older clients. I have a pretty big network nationwide, even worldwide. There's coaches in Europe and things that are doing it. So I can point you in the right direction of a good coach potentially in your area. Help get you started with a program if you want to work with a coach. Online. I can do that. So if you want any of that information or to contact me, andybaker.com is probably the best place to go.
All right. Thanks again, Andy. I appreciate it. And I wanted to probably chat with you a little bit if you had time once we close the show down. I'm not sure how to do it on the phone. So if I'm off, we'll get in contact again somehow or another. I'll email you or whatnot. But again, thank you so much. And remember, everybody, get strong.
All right, man. See ya. Thanks for having me on.